This is TWIS, This Week in Science, episode number 833, recorded on Wednesday, July 14th, 2021. How do pandas eat bamboo? Hey there, I'm Dr. Kiki, and tonight on the show, we will fill your head with ripples, pandas, and plasticity. But first, thanks to our amazing Patreon sponsors for their generous support of TWIS. You can become a part of the Patreon community at patreon.com/thisweekinscience.
Disclaimer. The future is coming. The future is coming. Right now, wherever you are, whatever you happen to be doing, the future is about to change things. It might be for the better. It might be an anticipated change. Something overdue that has taken a long time in getting here. It might be a change that improves your life in ways that maybe even right now you can't imagine because you don't know what they are, but they could change everything for the better. It also might be a future that is worse, where the weather is always too hot and getting hotter. One where robots take all the jobs from humans, or worse, one in which the robots don't take all the jobs from humans. The future can be good, the future can be bad, the future is the future, it's just how the future works. But one thing about the future, it's often predictable. Global warming is predictable. Pandemics are predictable. Automation taking over manufacturing, that's predictable. The only thing we can't predict is how humans will react once they learn that the real driving force behind every change the future has in store started with a conversation on This Week in Science. Coming up next.
I've got the kind of mind I can't get enough. I want to learn everything. I want to fill it all up with new discoveries that happen every day of the week. There's only one place to go to find the knowledge I seek. I want to know what's happening. What's happening? What's happening this week in science? What's happening? What's happening? What's happening this week in science?
Good science to you, Kiki and Blair.
And a good science to you too, Justin, Blair, and everyone out there. Welcome to another episode of This Week in Science on Bastille Day. Is it not? July 14th?
I still don't know what a Bastille is.
Oui.
Oui.
C'est Bastille. C'est le jour de
C'est
Bastille.
une Bastille.
Yeah?
Yeah, speaking in French doesn't really help. I still don't
I'm
understand.
trying to help you out here. Happy Bastille Day to any and all of our French listeners out there, and everyone else. I hope you are ready. Everyone else? No, French listeners as well. I do hope that everyone is ready for a great episode full of fun science, facts, tidbits, explorations, and curiosities. I have got stories about ripples in the earth. I've also got a story about some new math related to black holes, and I've got some brain psychedelics and plasticity science for the end of the show. So everyone who makes it to the end of the show, we get to take some psychedelic science. Nice. Yeah. Justin, what you got?
I have got blurry lines between friends and lovers. I have got while you were sleeping, robots took over farms. That just happened. A species with three distinct sexes was discovered, as well as why forensic anthropologists really aren't racist, even though they're the only ones still using race in science.
Well, okay. We will see what you mean by that when we get there. Blair, what is in the animal corner?
Yes, I have video games, pandas, and cockatoos.
All the animals.
Yeah.
And video games.
Yeah.
Has somebody made a panda cockatoo video game? Is this on? No? Okay.
No, but animals are related.
All right. Well, I hope everyone is ready for these science games tonight. And if you have not yet subscribed, I would like to remind you that we are on YouTube, Facebook, Twitch, as This Week in Science. We are also on most major podcast networks, platforms. Look for This Week in Science, and our website is TWIS.org. All right, let's dig into cosmology, the math of the universe, what it is that makes the universe tick. Black holes are a big thing in the universe, right? We're trying to explain black holes, and we've had a few stories. Last week, Justin was talking about herds of wild black holes roaming the cosmos. And this week,
the plurality of singularities.
The plurality of singularities. I do like that, those words to describe it. I came across a study this week related to the way that black holes lens light. Now, we know that they have a massive gravitational field because of their mass, and this gravitational field can actually bend the pathway of light through space-time. So light, a photon of light, traveling from behind the black hole, intersecting close enough to just bounce off the edge of the black hole, can be kind of bent around and redirected. And in the process, depending on how close to the black hole it was, it may be distorted on the other side or not. The closer to the black hole without getting sucked in, the more distortion there actually is. Well, a mathematician just published his treatise, his mathematical proof of the way that the universe's light gets bent around black holes. And for around 40 years, we have known that it is an exponential function of 2 pi, which is about 500 times closer that the light, you have to look from one image to the next to get to see light bent around a black hole. So I'm going to find myself a couple of images here to pull out and help describe.
I need a picture.
We need some pictures for the people in the viewing audience, people in the listening audience.
Either that or I need a picture or I need a slice of that pie.
I like pies. Pies are good. All right. So light coming past a black hole, if it is within the gravitational field of the black hole, it will be bent around that black hole. And what we have found is that it actually will travel around the black hole. It will travel around the rim of that event horizon, but bent around it and travel back out toward us. It's kind of like a bendy slingshot. But if it has just the right trajectory, it could get spun around a couple of times. Or one time it spins around, goes around the black hole at a decent distance, but then it gets 500 times closer and you get it going around again. And if there's room left yet to get closer to the black hole without getting sucked in, it can even get 500 times closer to the black hole from where it was previously. And each time it goes around and comes out and bounces out, it allows us to take another image. So if you could imagine a supernova blasting off behind a black hole and the light traveling past the black hole gets bent around it once, we would see the lensing and that bent, the magnifying effect of the gravitational field. We would see that supernova blasting off the one time that it looped around or went past the black hole. Now, if it were at a different trajectory that allowed it to get closer and closer and to loop around to get bent a couple of times, what you see are successive images of that supernova. So in time, we could see that supernova going off once, twice, 3 times, maybe more, depending on the trajectory of the light and how many times it gets spun around the black hole.
That's what because I've seen those lensing images before, where you see like there's you can see all this stuff that's been magnified in the distance. And then the little footnote is actually those are all the same thing that you're seeing. Yes. You're seeing different versions of like the same galaxies or stars in the background that are just getting, it's either like sort of actually that illustration that you had up there was perfect because some of them do look kind of smeared, yes. And then some of them look like you would expect. But that's interesting. I didn't realize it's because they're going round and around and around at different orbits, basically. Yeah,
so the light is getting closer and closer and closer, and the more it goes in toward the black hole, the more smeared out it gets, the larger it gets, but the more distorted and smeared out it gets. And so we can use that effect, and we have used that effect to be able to magnify images of distant galaxies, supernovas, other things.
Because they've reversed it before, right? They've taken that smeared image and been like, here's how it's supposed to be, and like re-lensed it back to look like the thing so they could see behind.
Yeah, and so this mathematician this Dutch researcher who has formalized now a mathematical description of how the light bends around black holes. What it's going to do is, like, we've known about this. We've known the exponential equation of 2 pi, blah, blah, blah. We've known this for a long time, but we haven't known exactly why the relationship works or how exactly it works. So this will help us understand black holes a lot better and the gravity that's associated with black holes. And in addition to kind of formalizing the math of how the light gets bent, he also integrated the spin of black holes. And so this 500 times factor, the e to the 2 pi that we've known about, that is for a stable black hole that doesn't really have a spin. But black holes do spin. And some black holes spin faster than other black holes. And what he was able to show through his mathematical equations is that the faster that a black hole is spinning, the smaller that equation becomes. So it's no longer necessarily e to 2 pi anymore. Instead of 500 times, it can be 50 times or even 10 times, depending on the speed of rotation of the black hole. So the speed of the rotation of the black hole affects the gravitational effect on the bending of the light, which is very, so it's the spherical cow just is doing ballet now, and it's going to get very interesting. And the last paragraph of the paper that he wrote, I think, has a philosophical aspect that I think is really interesting, that I want you all to think about this for a moment. Philosophically, there is a mathematical beauty within the dual exponentials of these equations. The exponentials prescribe that an observer at infinity will see the entire black hole's event horizon and anything accreting onto the black hole mapped infinitely when looking closer toward the photon capture radius of the black hole. Just beyond the photon capture radius, the exponentials dictate that the observer will also see the entire universe mirrored in exponentially smaller slivers until the quantum limit, a divergence which certainly merits further reflection.
I understood some of that.
It's the philosophical idea that potentially because there's light being emitted from all things in all places, that there could be light coming from all over the universe, and each black hole in the universe could also be a mirror of the universe.
Yeah, because this is also the weird thing, just looking at that first graphic, like, okay, so light goes in, and depending on the angle, it pops back out. And that's how the light we're seeing actually went around a little while and then popped out again. But light has this weird tendency to kind of go everywhere, so it's probably popping out in more than one location. So why can't we see everything from every direction when we look at a black hole? And maybe that's why it's black.
Yeah.
I was wondering
we're seeing all of the light from everywhere, and most of the light is from space, which is dark. It doesn't make sense either.
For sure. But anyway, some mind-bending, light-bending physics. But I love that the researchers have been attempting to describe these things, to formalize the math, to write these equations. And it's just wonderful when these kinds of advances get made, when proofs are made of concepts that we kind of understood, but now we can understand them better. What doesn't suck, Justin? Relationships? I don't know. That was a bad segue. That was a terrible segue.
That's a great segue. Yeah, relationships don't suck.
It's true.
This is according to scientists. 2/3 of romantic couples start out as friends, whereas the last third never liked each other.
I like the way you have framed this study. Here we go.
Yeah, according to University of Victoria researchers who published a new study in social, psychological, and personality science, it actually says 2/3 of romantic relationships start out platonically. So we're used to, I guess, movies, a lot of stories show romance sparking.
Cute. Yeah.
Two strangers meet, passing in the night, eyes across the room. Real life, it turns out couples like hang out for a couple of years, just being buddies, and then finally give up on dating because it's too hard to meet anyone and else and wind up together. That's my...
I have multiple questions.
Okay.
My first one just being, is this just any romantic couple at any stage in their life?
Yeah.
Is this all of the romantic couples that you have been a part of in your life as a survey respondent?
Is this successful, like in terms of successful, like, yeah, like are they
Long-term?
still
Okay,
together
okay.
long term?
Yeah.
How many of
this
these
is-
friendships
this is-
became romantic that then ended in
Yes.
sadness?
So I do believe, and I could be wrong about this actually, but I did get the impression that they interviewed people while they were heavily in their relationship about how the relationship started and in the first place. But I could be wrong about that. It says, well, the researchers had noticed 75% of studies previously done on how relationships start focused on that whole spark of romance thing. Like, how does that get started? And then what happens? And it turns out that that's only about 8% of romance that develops. Oh, no. I'm sorry. I take that back. It's the other 25%. Only 8% of the studies were done on people who were friends and then became in a relationship. Even though that is 2/3 of the relationships. The lead author, Stinson, a psychological professor at University of Victoria, Canada, we might have a good understanding of how strangers become attracted to each other and start dating, but that's simply not how most relationships begin. They looked at 1,900 university students and crowdsourced adults as well, and they came up with a 66% reporting that the current most recent romantic relationship the people had, there's the answer to the question, it's the current most recent relationship that these folks had, began as a friendship. There was very little variation across gender, level of education, ethnic groups. However, the rate of friends first initiation was highest amongst 20-somethings, and within the LGBTQ plus fluid communities, 85% started of couples started.
So
as
this
friendship.
whole being relegated to the friend zone,
That's
not
on track.
always a bad
You're
thing.
on track. You'll chill there.
It'll work out in the end.
Well, so 20-somethings, I would
Yes.
expect that to be the case because your entire friend group or your entire world is based on friend groups, right? Especially if you're for many years prior to that, and you've only just started like going to bars and doing other things, or you're going to meet people other ways.
Meeting strangers.
I do wonder
Yeah.
though, since there is such there is a very large number of people who use apps, the Tinder app and online dating programs to be able to meet people, and you wouldn't necessarily, if that leads to a committed relationship, you wouldn't say that you met that person was a friend first necessarily.
Right.
Like you met them online or you met them on an app.
Yeah.
So
and for
I
that
think it
reason,
is interesting.
Yeah, I think it'll change. I think if they repeated this study in 20 years, even 10 years maybe, I think it might be different because of that, because of the app-based model and how more common that is. But I also do wonder, since they were looking at university students and the public, if it did skew younger and therefore it skewed from this previous way. Because like even people who aren't currently with somebody who started out as a friend, if you ask them about their first however many relationships, I would be willing to bet those have a very high rate of that being the case.
You should do a study, Blair.
It just seems like, yeah, if you're starting a relationship in your teens and 20s, chances are you've known that
It's
person.
a friend.
Yeah.
Yeah. Someone you've met. I don't know. I do think it's very interesting that even for this, with the college age crowd,
Mhm.
that it wasn't apps first, that it was friends. Yeah.
Mhm.
Friendship. It's great for a commitment.
Yeah, so,
It's nice to like the person first.
Yeah. Yeah.
and it does track with what you're talking about there, Blair. It says among university students, there were friends for 1 to 2 years before beginning a romantic relationship.
That's a long friend zone period.
That is a long friend zone. It is. That's commitment
Also,
to friendship.
Maybe one of the two is dating someone and then they're interested and they become friends first.
Mhm.
They wait for their opportunity.
Yeah, it could be that. Or it could just be that the young people... It could be
I'm
that
raising my hand. That would be me.
It could be that the young people are all just having sex all the time.
And
they're
don't have as many committed relationships.
The starting of the relationship is just when you've narrowed down the list.
Right.
Yep.
It could also
Become
just be-
exclusive. Yeah. And before that, you were friends.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's just friends. Which meant, never mind.
All right. You know what friends love to do together these days? Play video games.
Yeah. So did you know that a video game could teach you about conservation? Even if that's not the initial intention?
Okay, I just got uninterested in playing this game.
Well,
outside.
I told you it was Red Dead Redemption 2.
What?
Yes. So this is a study from University of Exeter, and they looked at players of the game Red Dead Redemption 2 to learn if it helped to teach them how to identify American wildlife. So this game, for those of you that don't know, have you been living under a rock or whatever? No, actually, I've never played it. It takes place in the American West in 1899. And there's simulations in the game of about 200 real species of animals you could have found in the American West in 1899. So after having played, they challenged gamers, and they also challenged a small cohort of people who'd never played the game before for, a sample, kind of a control. And so they wanted to see if they could identify photographs of real animals based on their experience playing the game and having the computer-generated animals. And on average, the players of Red Dead Redemption 2 were able to identify 10 of 15 American animals in a multiple-choice quiz, which was actually 3 more than people who had not played the games. And the best performers were people who had completed the game's main story. They beat the game, right? And usually it takes 40 to 50 hours to do that. Or if they had played extremely recently. One gamer in particular said, in relation to him being able to spot a ram who's able to charge, saying, quote, "No joke, saved me from breaking a leg in real life." So I do wonder what he was doing to be around that ram. And yes, I said I don't know for sure it's a boy, but I feel it anyway. So, anyway, they didn't just learn about the specific animals, but they also learned about animal behavior because they also behave realistically in the game. They interact with each other. So, for example, an opossum might play dead if another animal came near it. A bear might bluff charge, and you might see eagles hunting snakes. These are all things that can happen in the game, and these kind of avatars for animals end up doing things with each other, which is really interesting. The other really interesting thing is that they had oddly couched real conservation messaging in there. And so the picture that Kiki's showing right now is of the Carolina parakeet. This is an extinct species, but it was around in 1899. And hunting played a role in their extinction. So in the game, if players shoot that species, they are warned that the species is endangered, and if they continue shooting, the species will become extinct in the game. If they keep killing these Carolina parakeets, they'll stop showing up in the game. So there actually is an environmental consequence of the players' actions. So for a game where you're running around as a cowboy shooting people, it's very interesting that they decided to add this extra layer of realism. It is so wild. So the first layer of the quiz, they just asked, "What is this called?" And they had to try to enter text. And if they were unable to, then they would show the multiple choice options. And so also interestingly, or not surprisingly, the greatest difference between players and non-players in identification came with animals that were useful and used in the game. So for an example, a fish that you can catch and eat. So they were able to identify that fish because they had to catch and eat that in the game. So it's just an interesting kind of look at how you can try to make educational games, but you can also try to make games educational. So if you're trying to do a historically accurate or a geographically accurate game, it's possible to add layers of realism that could actually help these indoor kids, people playing games inside, interact with nature, which seems crazy, right? You would want to say, like, get off that video game and go interact with nature, but they actually learned about nature.
Yeah, which is the best of both worlds, right? We want them to know about nature. We want them to care about it, but we don't want anybody going anywhere near it.
Right. This is what you keep saying, Justin, and pushing this perspective. And maybe through video games, we can achieve your goal.
Yeah. We found a middle ground between me never wanting people to go into nature again and Blair thinking that there's an important lesson and that they need to care about nature by going out into it. Here we have it. Hey, we'll have a video game with lots of nature, but you're not allowed to go into the forest anymore. That's just the rule.
Have you played Hiker 2.0 yet? Yeah. No, I don't think this would replace the real natural world, but it is, I think, an important bid to make sure those layers of realism are included in games, since it's possible now.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, there are lots of games where having that kind of accessibility, that information ability, as Gord is saying within the chat here, that there's the possibility of like all these different games that have history and mythology brought into it. Why not ecology and conservation? There's no reason that the attitude that has started to pervade Hollywood, where there are scientists and educators working to help make films more accurate and actually have science and technology integrated better into films and television, that shouldn't be happening in video games as well, especially as they become more realistic. Although Animal Crossing has been great for teaching kids about animals as well, and it's very not realistic. It's cartoony.
Totally. Yeah. Well, you got to meet people where they are. They're not going to say, "Oh, I'm going to put down Red Dead Redemption and I'm going to play like the conservation biology the game." You got to meet them halfway, right?
I mean, it's conservation biology the game where you actually get to go out and it more like Red Dead Redemption on the poachers, maybe. I don't know. But...
Oh my gosh.
From conservation to death, I'm going to take us back in time to the Chicxulub impact. The impact that killed a whole bunch of dinosaurs, made a big impact on our planet when it hit Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula about 66 million years ago. This impact, we know that there were major tsunamis when it happened. We know it affected the biosphere. There were fires. It changed weather. There was a study last year or 2 years ago about water that was pushed upriver well into the middle of North America. And we've been finding evidence of mud being pushed and fish and other animals being just devastated by the flooding that occurred. Researchers have also thought that there might be other evidence of ripples within the planet. And one thing that a group of researchers did is they got imaging data, seismic imaging data from a gas company, Devon Energy. This data is used by gas companies around the world to figure out, they bounce radar waves, basically off the sediments, off the crust of the earth, to figure out where there are pockets of gas underneath the surface. And this is what the gas companies use it for, so they can find the big places where they should stick their wells. But this researcher, Gary Kinsland, geophysicist at University of Louisiana Lafayette, thought that maybe they would be able to use this seismic data to be able to find ancient buried ripples from the tsunami, from these giant seismic waves and actual physical waves that affected the sediments when the asteroid impacted the planet. And so they analyzed a layer of Earth, of sediment, about 1,500 meters underground, that the timing of what they estimate it should be at about, the sediment should have existed at about the same time on the surface as the asteroid impact. And they saw fossilized ripples. They're calling them mega ripples, spaced about a kilometer apart. They're an average of 16 meters tall, and they think that these ripples are this imprint of the tsunami waves that basically they're underground. They're buried under 1,500 meters of earth, and yet they were able to use seismic waves bouncing them off the under earth
That is wild.
to be able to see them.
Hey, we found this dirt under this other dirt.
Exactly.
This stuff is trippy to me. I don't understand how you can measure dirt under other dirt.
That's basically what they did. That's yes.
the magic part of science, where they tell me they can do it, and I'm like, yep, sounds good. I don't get it, but I believe you.
Yeah, well, it's they know now based on the way that bounces happen. The bounce back tells them about how firm the dirt under the dirt is, what it's bouncing off of, potentially the density, what kind of material it could be bouncing off of, whether it's empty, like a gas chamber possibly would be, or very liquid filled, that would have a different bouncy reaction, a different timing of seismicity. Yeah, so it's fascinating. Researchers studying dirt under other dirt to determine the history of our planet.
Brad.
So cool. Yeah. So yeah, if we can say there's one benefit beyond, yes, our modern society has benefited from gasoline, petroleum, all the gas companies, but the seismic measuring that they have done, there's a treasure box of data that potentially has a lot more information similar to stuff like this, that if researchers can get access to the data that these companies have, there could be potentially more discoveries about our planet, which I think it's very exciting to me anyway.
Very interesting.
Yeah. All right. What do you have next, Justin?
While we were sleeping, farm robots were unboxed and put to work. Over the last weekend, farming robots have replaced humans in agriculture work, and apparently it's just working fine. Yeah.
That's great, because robots are not going to suffer from heat stroke as much as people will be.
No, and what's also great is they won't feel the ill effects of using chemicals in the field as well. So we can use a lot more chemicals on our crops than we used to. What? So this is a couple of different scenarios are being created. A couple of extremes about the future of agriculture and its impacts on the environment, according to agriculture economist Thomas Dome in a Science and Society article published on the 13th, which I guess would be yesterday, in the journal Trends in Ecology and Evolution. Dome he sort of paints two pictures for us. One, the pictures of utopia, where fleets of small, intelligent robots farm in harmony with nature to produce diverse, organic crops. A future where every announcer speaks with a mid-Atlantic accent. The other is a dystopia, in which large tractor-like robots subdue the landscape through heavy machinery and artificial chemicals, all the while playing heavy metal by hair bands of the 80s. And midway through, the announcer starts to choke and die from chemical exposure and all that hairband music. Dome describes the utopian scenario as a mosaic of rich green fields, streams, and wild flora, fauna, where fleets of small robots fueled by sustainable energy flit around the fields, their whirs intermixed with insect chirping and birdsong, like a futuristic Garden of Eden. Dome is a research fellow at the University of Hohenheim, Germany, studying agricultural development strategies. Says that small robots could help conserve biodiversity and combat climate change in ways that were not possible before. One of the things he's afraid of, though, is you could also replace humans with automation in fields by creating super industrial machinery that pollutes and that destroys resources and does massive development of monocrops throughout areas, that kills off biodiversity. His warning is that we could go a little both ways. We could easily go the bad way, because chances are it'll be slightly more efficient for whoever's owning the land and the robot initially. You know, if it's just their pure profit that they're worried about, that might be the little bit cheaper way to go. But this sort of small, farmer-friendly, or farmer replacement friendly, farm-friendly little robots in the diverse ecosystem growing organic is also this. We could put in the same resources, really, and we could end up there.
I wonder if we can just put in the same resources. I mean, for all these little things. So that's the analysis, is they figured out that the batteries, the electricity, all of the resources to create these multiple little tiny robots that can work on small family farms, as opposed to the large monoculture giant behemoth, big enough to dig dirt on Mars kind of giant robots. Yeah, so that's the way it works out. We can have utopia.
Well, the problem is...
We're not going to kill our planet in the process.
The problem is it's going to come down to putting guardrails on where this technology goes. Because if the funding for robot farming, and if the emphasis on robot farming is for giant monoculture crop, large-scale activities, that's the robots you'll end up with. Mm-hmm. If, on the other hand, you do a little bit more of a focus on the organic farmer's needs, focus on the small family farm. I mean, the actual, there's a family with a last name that's associated with that farm, and they're living on that farm, and they're working that farm. That kind of size family farm. You can achieve that as well. It just depends on which way this technology takes off. And usually in the past, industry has driven a lot of technology changes, but more recently, sort of a consumer.
Mega corporations and consumers.
Consumers have driven a lot of tech for what they like about tech or what they don't like. The choices that individual people make about tech makes a big difference. So what it would come down to in this is choosing your tech through your food source, through your food chain. Being choosy about your food chain will push the future robot domination of farms towards the small organic biodiverse farm with the flitting and the whirring and the
I think that's tough, though.
Idyllic kind of sounds. Yeah. Yes.
I think putting the onus on the consumer is always really difficult, and it's kind of like pushing a cart up a hill alone. But I think what you have to do is you have to ask for legislation or some sort of financial support or backing of the family farm model, because otherwise corporations have too much to gain. Yeah.
And there's also consumers only choose from the choices they're given. Yes.
Yeah.
So there has to be something to start the chain of choices. We buy products that are wrapped in plastic because we haven't been given choices for products that are not wrapped in plastic for 20 years or so. It's a lot to do. The onus is put on consumers when there's a lot of the manufacturers just making those choices first, and that's all we get.
Yep.
So if those little robots, if those little farms go by the wayside too soon, the choice won't be ours to make. Okay, I have one more story for our starting of the show. In this, Blair, I know you're aging. We're all aging. We all want to...
Don't talk about it. I found another gray hair today. I'm losing my mind.
Well, researchers at Stanford University and the Buck Institute they've come up with a new measure of aging. They're calling it iAge. Like iPhone, except iAge.
Oh,
I'm gonna have to say
I
no.
age, you
Isn't that
age.
trademarked?
we
Apple
age.
own the
Yeah,
letter,
I
lowercase
don't
letter
know.
I? I think they own that letter. I think you cannot start any sentence with that letter, that lowercase I, anymore.
I
Like
don't
they
know.
bought that whole section of the
Not-
dictionary.
That I don't know anything about. What I do know is that these researchers have based this system off of research involving the 1,000 Immunomes Project. The 1,000 Immunomes Project has blood samples that have been taken from 1,001 healthy volunteers ages 8 to 96 over a period of about 7 years, 2009 to 2016. And they analyzed the blood samples for immune signaling proteins, cytokines. We know cytokines. You hear of cytokine storm when you have an overreaction to something like the flu. They looked also for the activation status of immune cell types in response to different kinds of stimuli. So how did the immune system in the blood sample respond, and the overall activity levels of genes that were in the cells. And then they figured out a whole bunch of data from this, and they're calling it their inflammatory clock. And so instead of using an aging clock based on epigenetics, they have decided that they want to use an aging clock based on inflammation. Because whereas we can't necessarily change our epigenetics very easily, because you have to get down into the cell and change methylation, and there are targets epigenetically, but it might be harder to get those therapeutically. Addressing inflammation is something that's more targetable. That's something that we might actually be able to do more easily. So they figured out that strongest predictors of inflammatory age were a set of 50 immune signaling cytokines. And then they came up with a number score that they could track with a person's immune system response and how they would, but whether or not the likelihood, the probability of how sick they would become or not. And they looked at a whole bunch of project participants, and they measured their speed at getting up from a chair. So it was like a period of time after they had their blood drawn and their immune systems like checked, and they came up with a number and all that kind of stuff. You're healthy, you're young immune system inflammasome. And they looked at these other measures, physical measures of whether or not they had aged and how they had aged. And basically they found that older people had inflammatory ages averaging 40 years less than their calendar age. And one 105-year-old man had an inflammatory age of 25.
Wow.
Yeah.
Give me his blood.
Wait, but how fast can he get out of a chair?
Yeah, so, and these getting out of the chair, these people, their inflammatory age, this group of people that they looked at were long-lived people, like the centenarians, people who were living, they came from long-living lineages, they were living very old, they had started aging, but their inflammatory system had not. And compared to other individuals that they looked at who were younger, but had older inflammatory systems, these older people were more sprightly. Of course they're going to live longer. Their bodies aren't turning on themselves and starting to attack themselves. And they came down to determining one substance, CXCL9, is like the biggest contributor to their inflammatory age score. And they can look at this specific compound. And usually after about age 60, it starts to just go up. It's been implicated in cardiovascular disease. They are implicating this compound in a number of inflammation-related disorders that contribute to cellular dysfunction. And they think that if we could inhibit this compound, maybe we could reduce our risk of cardiovascular disease and potentially help people live longer better.
This is nice. I like this. There's also the study we did a while back, we talked about a while back, about the speed that people walk determines the length of their life. And then I think just how quick you get out of a chair will tell you a lot. There's a point there in life, when you notice getting out of a chair. There's a point in life where you're young enough, you're sitting, now you're standing. Didn't really notice the transition at all. And then slowly over time, you're like, well, I'm going to need to put a hand over here, one down over here. Now I'm in position to stand. I will now commence standing with a little bit of a groany sound. Okay, there we go. Up. That just right there tells you how much time you have left.
Take care of your inflammatory system, reduce inflammation, and you will potentially be able to live healthier longer without having to stand up.
So I need a healthy person's immune system. I see what you're saying.
Always walk faster than you think you need to. Mm-hmm. And do some chair exercise. I don't think people really practice getting in and out of chair enough. Because right now you're young, you're like, I can get out of chair anytime I want. But, you lose those muscles and they stay gone. Just letting you know.
Yeah, so anyway, this may become an easy test to check your blood and see what your immune inflammation score is to let you know how quickly you're aging, whether or not you need to work on reducing inflammation, whether or not your body's doing fine. Maybe this kind of a test will really be a predictor for people of how they're going to age. And if people can start measuring this early, then, follow them until they're older.
You had another story also, that, by the way, that confirms that vampires probably are living forever.
Yeah.
They're just taking young blood. That's just
young blood.
Yeah.
Young blood. Oh, vampires. Vampires.
You were right all along.
I'm not a vampire. Are you a vampire? I mean, maybe I'm a vampire if I stay up all night long, but that doesn't happen that much anymore. I'm old now. I'm trying to work on the inflammation here, people. If you're listening, thank you so much for joining us for This Week in Science this week. Every week we bring you the down-to-earth, reasonable, trustworthy news, we hope. We try and educate you on what science is digging into and help you find your way through the amazing diversity and amount of scientific information that is out there and give you a kind of sane perspective. Sometimes not so sane vampires, but anyway, if you're enjoying the show, really would appreciate if you headed over to TWIS.org and clicked on that Patreon link. Click on the Patreon link. You can support us at any level of your choosing to help us continue to keep bringing TWIS to you every single week. So head over to Patreon, head over to TWIS.org, click on the Patreon link, select your level of giving, and know that you're helping to bring science and TWIS to more people. We thank you for your support. We can't do it without you. Alrighty, it's time to come on back here, and it's time for no more video games. No. It's not time for video games. It's time for Blair's Animal Corner!
With Blair!
She loves our creatures, great and small. Biped, millipede, no pet at all. If you want to hear about animals, she's your girl. Except for giant pandas and squirrels. There's Animal Corner.
What you got, Blair?
I have a story about pandas.
Okay, so now I am just ready for the panda bashing.
Yeah.
Let it begin.
Yes. So this is a study all about panda teeth. We've talked about panda stomachs. We've talked about panda reproduction. We've talked about panda navigation. Now it's time to talk about panda teeth. So this is a study performed by researchers from the Institute of Dentistry at the University of Turku and the Biodiversity Unit of the University of Turku, together with researchers from the China Conservation and Research Center for Giant Pandas. Of course, you have to include them because that's your only way to get access to pandas. This has been the first in the world to look at the mystery of how giant pandas can eat bamboo. Now, aside from the stomach side, this is just physically, how do they eat it? The reason this is a big question mark is because, as we have discussed, pandas come from carnivores. So they have carnivore teeth. They have canines. But they are in practice an herbivore. They eat bamboo. So they need to be able to grind bamboo, and they also need to be able to kind of pull off the abrasive and toxic compounds on the green outer skin of bamboo. They need to be able to peel that, and then they need to be able to chew bamboo. So herbivores have ridged molars that help them grind plant materials. They have jaws that allow them to move their jaw back and forth sideways, like a camel, which they use for grinding their food. And so large canines don't prevent sideways movement. So, for example, we can do that, but the reason that that movement is possible is the temporomandibular joint. So they were trying to figure out, because bears can't do that. They can't move their jaw back and forth. They can only chomp. So they use 3D scanning methods.
How did that go?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. They found that pandas' temporomandibular joints evolved to differ from brown bears and polar bears. So there is some evolution happening that allows them to eat bamboo. So in addition to the open close, they also can move their mouth sideways. I'm not sure what that sound would be like. Ew, right? So this is required. I'm in a mood. This is required to peel the bamboo. Okay, so their large canines do not get in the way, and they do need these large canines to fight with each other because they're so active all the time. So this change in their temporomandibular joint is what allows them to do the side to side versus just the up and down. And so it does appear that evolutionarily, this part of their body caught up to the expectation. So they use their premolars to peel the bamboo, and then they are able to use their molars to chew it. So this also helps us understand how our teeth work, because our teeth occlude very similar, they come together very similar to a carnivore, but we do eat plant matter, and so we are able to do that grinding motion that carnivores usually can't. So this could be a key into how that works for us as well. So this solves, they say, quote unquote, it solves the long prevailing mystery of the ecological interrelationship between pandas and bamboo plants. I say it solves the long prevailing mystery of panda teeth and bamboo. But it does not solve the stomach stuff, the reason they gave up higher caloric intake for bamboo, just all of it. It doesn't explain the rest of why pandas are, but it explains the teeth, which is cool.
There's a little bit on the gut microbiome being shared with other herbivores. Mm-hmm. So there's some stuff going on in there too that's not straight up carnivore.
Yes, but they still do have a lot of microbiota from carnivores. So that's why one of the researchers on that study, however long ago, said it appears that pandas kind of always have a stomachache.
Maybe that's why they don't like doing a lot of things. They just don't feel good most of the time.
And if you're a wild animal and you don't feel good and you don't want to do stuff, why do you exist?
Hey, honey.
Anyway,
no, not tonight. I have a stomach ache.
Yeah,
I say that every
it doesn't
night.
matter. We don't need to get in the bashing. This is ultimately just, hey, we figured out how they eat bamboo mechanically.
That's cool. So they have these adaptations that allow them to eat bamboo when other carnivorous bears would not be able to. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's great.
Yep.
Jaw differences, teeth differences.
Yep.
They changed. They've adapted a bit. See, this is good. There's a bit of adaptation. Okay, so does this make you like pandas a little bit more?
No.
Okay, just checking. I had to ask.
It's still they gotta catch up or go away. That's how how evolutionary radiation works, right? It tries a bunch of stuff, and some of it works, and some of it doesn't. This isn't working, buddies. Figure it out.
Figure it out.
I digress.
Yeah. Next story.
Yes, that's for animals that should be extinct. Let's talk about animals that should not be extinct but are going extinct.
Oh no. Okay.
So this is a study from the University of Hong Kong, and I'm always very interested in using scientific technology to prevent poaching and trafficking of endangered animals, because there's a big problem with, so CITES, the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Fauna and Flora, has a list of animals that you cannot traffic between countries on our planet. They have set up, you cannot trade in merchandise or live animals created by, this endangered species. It could be plants, it could be animals, but they have this expectation. But the problem remains that once that stuff makes it through customs and it is in a consumer's hand, if they're getting a wild animal as a pet, or if they're buying alligator shoes or whatever it is, right? All of those things, once they're in those hands, if that person who owns that thing, A, didn't know it was an illegal trade, or B, wants to lie about it, it's pretty difficult to prevent that from happening. And so I am fascinated by new scientific technologies to, for better word, police that trade to make sure that people are being honest about where this stuff comes from. So this is done by ecologists from the Conservation Forensics Laboratory of the Research Division for Ecology and Biodiversity at the University of Hong Kong. That's a big mouthful to say. Conservation forensics, that's cool. They applied stable isotope techniques to determine whether birds in pet trade are captive or wild caught. So most parrots that you see as pets were not born in captivity. They do not do well in captivity breeding. This is a sweeping generalization. There might be specifics that are different from species to species, but as a sweeping generalization, lots of reptiles and lots of tropical birds do not breed well in captivity. So if somebody has one as a pet, more than likely that animal was taken from the wild where it was born. The person who has that as a pet might not have known that, might have been lied to, might not be a bad person, but that is a situation. And yellow-crested cockatoos are one of those situations. They are critically endangered. They're from Indonesia, and they have a global population of less than 2,500. But they are traded as pets. And the pet trade is the main reason for their endangerment. In Hong Kong alone, they have about a population of 150 to 200 individuals that are, outside town. And so that was all through release of birds that were transported as pets. So they wanted to find, if you have a pet cockatoo, did you get that from a pet store that bred that cockatoo, or did you get it from somebody who snatched one from the wild and sold it to you, maybe claimed it was born in a pet store, right? And so this is what's really cool. They looked at these cockatoos. They observed 33 of them that were for sale between 2017 and 2018. And I should mention that the official import number into Hong Kong was 10. So something was going on there. And so they, granted, some of them could have been bred by home breeders, but as I mentioned, that's really hard to do. Or they were trafficked from abroad, which of course is illegal, or they were taken from this free-flying colony, also illegal. So 2 out of 3 options there are illegal. They looked at the stable isotope analysis and compound-specific stable isotope analysis on their feathers. And they were able to tell a difference between wild cockatoos and pet cockatoos because their diet was different. So their diet related to different isotopes in their feathers.
That's amazing. So it's like, hey, people, you eat too much corn, and we know that now, but with birds.
Yes, exactly. And so they were able to identify this difference, and so they do think that they could apply this test in the future to determine whether a cockatoo being traded has been raised in the wild or captivity. I say bring it a step further and sanctioned captive breeders of animals that are protected should be required to use certain foods
Right.
in those captive breeding facilities. So you are saying, okay, you have this isotope, that means you are a legally traded animal. So that
That would make sense.
You take the variability out of what are they eating in the wild? Did they fly into somebody's backyard and eat somebody's dog food? And that messed up with the isotopes, right? You were saying, okay, I've put this non-native food as a marker in the captive bred sanctioned population so that I know what is allowed and what is not. So that's my pitch based on this technology, but I absolutely love it.
That's a clever application. Yeah, you know what also could prevent poaching in nature? Robots.
Mm-hmm.
I'm telling you, robots are the answer.
Well, the other ultra simplistic answer is don't have wild animals as pets, which I could do a type 20 on right now, but I won't. But they're, this
is that tight? Reason. Is that tight? Is 20 minutes cannot be tight?
Trust me, it could be an hour, but it's a type 20. Anyway,
I don't know if that's call that.
If you cannot for sure know where that animal came from, and that animal is often trafficked, maybe don't have that animal as a pet. Is all I'm saying.
Yeah.
So do your research before you get a pet. Make sure that animal is being sourced ethically and is not endangering wild species. Because no matter how reputable you think a dealer is, they might not be. Right?
Yeah.
Anyway.
Make sure that your bird has the right isotopes.
Yeah. So this is the demonstration, the very first demonstration of the applicability of stable isotope techniques in wildlife forensics. So obviously there's more work to be done. They want to validate this as a robust forensic test. They need to test it amongst different types of animals. And so this is a promising first study to continue this in research and maybe eventually employ it in law enforcement of CITES.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I love the idea. I mean, that's actually like your idea. That's a business idea. It's if you could start a business with your bird food that has its special isotope in it, as long as, it's safe for the birds, but measurable by the technology, and get everyone to agree to it. And then ta-da!
There you go.
Suddenly the pet stores and the breeders and everybody knows what they need to do. Just get the test and, this bird is validated as a well-sourced bird.
Mm-hmm. There you
and
go.
I'm sure it would work for other animals as well.
Yeah.
Because these isotopes end up in hair and maybe scales a little bit less, but yeah.
You could definitely, a snake shed, you could test for isotopes for sure.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Very cool. Very, very cool. This is This Week in Science. Thank you for listening to the show. Hey, Justin, what you got?
Oh, that's a good question. Let's see which one. Okay. Let's do it this one. Race is a social construct that was invented by racist people, which is funny because you'd think there couldn't have been racist people before somebody had invented race theory, but it was already, they were already racist. They just put it into words, very well defined why and how and who they're racist about.
It's othering. Yeah.
So one of the constructs of that, though, is a lot of the basis for how a lot of sciences progressed beyond that. One of those fields where it's still persistent is the field of forensic anthropology, where they have quotients that rate a skull, for instance, for whether it is white, whether it is black, or whether it is Hispanic, with some caveat for Asian and for Native American. And this study is saying here that this is Ann Ross, corresponding author of the study, a professor of biological science at North Carolina State University. Forensic anthropology is a science, and we need to use terms consistently. Our study both highlights our discipline's challenges in discussing issues of ancestral origin consistently, and suggests that focusing on population affinity would be a way forward. So part of the problem is that for a long time, forensic anthropology has used race. And then they kind of started to move towards calling things ancestry. The problem is nothing else changed about what they were doing. If you look at the old chart that the ancestry quotient is based on, you're going to find a race chart. It's the same ones. The problem with getting away with it, or getting away from it, is that it's exceedingly useful. There are morphological differences in the skull if your ancestors came from Africa, compared to if they are indigenous Native American, if they are from East Asia, if you're European. There's different features that can give clues. This is exceedingly important because even if you had a thing that wasn't even based on race or ancestry, we had some number quotient or some group, we have a person of 5 who we have found. Eventually, you're going to be taking this information to the police department, and you're going to tell them you have a number 5 person that we believe, based on our analysis of the skull, who was murdered, and you might want to see if you have any missing people who are of a 5, and the police officer is going to go, "Are we looking for a black guy or a white guy or like an Asian guy?" Because that's going to help narrow down the missing person that you're looking for, because there's things that we can identify within our society that are visible differences that, if they're not being used to divide us, if they're being used to track down a missing person, become exceedingly expedient. So you're not going to get rid of ancestry conversation in forensic anthropology, because it's a lot of identification can be done in this way. They've already kind of switched it from race to ancestry, but other than that word, pretty much nothing has changed.
I think that's really interesting. The idea that, it's not race, because you have people who have moved all over the world. You have people from Africa who've moved to North America. You've had people from Europe move to South America. You've had, Asians and Indians and, people from all over are mixing and matching and going different places. And they're, within hundreds of years, thousands of years, there still might be local selection on things, but it's, for the large part, not going to overpower those broader geographical differences. And it's really just geographic, because we're all human. The human race. Can we just talk about the human race? And then we have geographical differences and natural selection that has led to changes in ancestry, different ancestries.
Now there's a 3-year-old skeleton found in the woods.
Right.
And as quickly as possible, you want to be able to identify who that might have been.
Yeah.
And there is morphological differences. And it's important actually to understand them, because, for instance, if you can date, like, say it's a child, you can actually tell the age of a child based on which teeth have erupted, what stage of development teeth are in. They're a very fine indicator. But if you don't have the wherewithal to say this is a Native American child, most likely based on the morphology of the skull and everything else, and we're going to throw it into Native American category. Okay. Then if you don't do that, then you don't understand that those teeth erupted at a different rate. And so then your age could be off by as much as a year.
Right.
2.
Yeah.
So it's you still need it. And so there's a thing that I think people go too far in saying, we can't say an Italian guy anymore. We have to say a Southern European geographically located ancestry of It's okay. It's still kind of okay if it's in the right hands. If it's in the right hands, talking about things is not a problem.
Well, I think it's the conversation around equity and color blindness has mostly gone away, right? That was a mythos from the 90s where we're like, if we can just make everyone not see color, everything will be perfect. And now it's kind of used as a shroud for everything's fine. But in reality, it not just in this situation, but when you're trying to create equity, you have to identify who's missing from the table, right? Yeah, and absolutely. So if the idea that you can erase whatever you want to call it, geographic ancestry, ethnicity, XYZ, however you want to call it, the idea to erase that from any equation is probably incorrect. Also because we know that certain people have been left out of studies. If we're talking about science, we know that some people have been ignored in the medical field. Yeah. So you have to include that information.
Yeah,
so I think this is a really great way for the brunt of the study is that the terminology needs to be consistent. Mm-hmm. That because of different decades of different teaching styles, different emphases, different goals and needs, they're using different words to describe the same thing and erasing people when people shouldn't be erased, or highlighting other people when, it should be more egalitarian. And so I think it's this consistency that they're calling for that's really important. And ancestry is a good start.
And it's also there's a very great large requirement for greater regional definition. You can, if you're using a very thorough method, you can distinguish Asian is like this one of the categories that most forensic anthropologists will have in there. But there is actually differences between if it's a Korean versus a Japanese versus a Vietnamese versus but you have to be working on those changes to understand. And yes, at some point we've all moved and had babies with people from far-flung places, and it's like, I don't know where this person looks like they're from Africa and Japan. And then you go, oh, well, that's amazing because we're missing an African Japanese person from oh, okay, my gosh. Well, then we found them. But it's still, it's if you're doing police work, this is not just arbitrary. And to your point, Blair, if you don't see color, you can't see racism when it's happening.
There you go.
Yeah. What else do you have, Justin?
Oh, I got another. This is a story that I thought for sure Blair was going to bring. This is there was a professor for 30 years was traveling an hour west of his home in Tokyo to visit the Sagami River, collect algal samples to understand sex. It's not how everybody figures out sex, but this man for 30 years, this professor, an hour from his home each way, was trying to find sex in a river. And apparently he found it, and found it amazingly. This is the Pleodorina starii algae. He determined this algae has 3 sexes. They can be male, female, and a third sex that the researchers are just calling bisexual, in reference to the fact that it can produce both male and female sex cells in its own single genotype. And it exists due to normal expression of the species. So you have then 3 different types of pairings of sex that can take place within this species.
So this isn't just a hermaphrodite, or
no, it's not.
It's not like the fish, the Finding Nemo fish who decide to change sexes when someone is missing.
No, it's its own.
Different. Thank you.
It's like its own. Yeah, it's like in the old days. In the old days, it would have had its own bathroom. There would have been if this is the same in human societies, there would have always been 3 bathrooms. So then,
So the part of the reason I didn't bring this story is that I don't remember if we talked about it on the show or not, but I think last year it was discovered that there's a slime mold that had like 500 sexes.
Wow.
And so I was like, oh, 3? Psh.
3? That's nothing. Really? Yeah. Just 3?
Uh-huh.
I mean, this comes back to that, and what you're saying there, Blair, comes back to a lot of conversations that we've had in the Animal Corner and throughout the history of TWIS related to what we consider sexes and how it's a biological, what we are defining based on our human awareness, and it's also a biological construct. It's what are different bits of the organism, individuals of the organism that act a particular way to create next generation. how does reproduction take place?
Yeah, it's about, well, so this is the other thing is, when we're talking about sexes, we're talking about the way proteins are expressed that identify ways other beings with other proteins that have been expressed can be combined to create offspring, right? Mm-hmm. So like if you turn it into the super vanilla textbook definition of what sex is, then yes, a life type that does not have sex organs will naturally have lots of different DNA combinations that pair different ways with other DNA combinations. And I think that's really what, you read the headline, you think about sex organs and the way copulation works in multicellular big organisms.
Yeah,
that's
not what's
crazy.
Happening with the algae. Yeah.
Right. And with the algae, it's really just like, hey, you have a little column A, you have a little column B, you have a little column C. You can mix A and C, you can mix A and B, you can mix B and C.
Yeah.
Or you're a slime mold and you've got a giant array. Yeah. It's the big buffet of options.
Mm-hmm. Be our guest, yeah.
So is there this particular algae species, are they going to...
It's the first fungi that they have found that has been identified with 3 sexes. This has been seen in some invertebrate species and plants before as well, where they have 3 distinct sexes that are present.
This is This Week in Science. Thank you for joining us. Do you want some TWIS merchandise? Like a sweatshirt? Like a wonderful sciencey goodness mug? Head over to twis.org and click on our Zazzle link and support TWIS while you shop. I have some fun neuroscience-y stories for you all. Yeah, I want to dig into some neuroscience. Brain plasticity. What do you understand brain plasticity to be?
By the amount of microplastics that were omnipresent in our environment, our brain's tissue is slowly being replaced by plastic.
Well, I mean, we do have a problem with microplastics, and yeah, that's a different story, but not brain plasticity. Not where I was going, no.
Recovery is what I think of when I think of plasticity. Am I getting to it?
Yeah, so there's recovery, and it has to do with our brain's ability to change and adapt, to learn new information. Plasticity is the ability of our neurons to shoot out new connections, new dendrites, and to make new connections to new neurons, to create little spines on those dendrites, little synaptic boutons that reach out and touch other synaptic boutons, across with which action potentials can propagate chemically. We need synaptic plasticity. When you get depressed, your synaptic plasticity is reduced. The ability of your neurons to make connections is reduced, that your brain kind of pulls itself back. You can imagine the neurons in the brain pulling themselves back and not reaching out to touch anyone. And so one of the aspects of antidepressants is that they help our brains start to make those new connections again. There are many disorders of the brain and also aging, which can lead to reduced synaptic plasticity as you get older. Some researchers were interested in how synaptic plasticity is related to our ability to form long-term memories. And these researchers at Scripps Research Institute were looking not just at the dendrites touching other dendrites, they were looking at the inside of the neurons and the infrastructure that allows proteins that allows proteins to move from the cell body out along the axons to the dendrites where different commands can be made. Last week we talked a little bit about how they discovered these different frequencies, these different signals that were taking place in the cell bodies and out at the dendrites. And so I find this study following on that very interesting. Anyway, these researchers discovered that there is a a network of courier proteins. These molecules, they're kinesin molecules, which are motor molecules. And if you've ever seen some of the visualizations of kinesins walking down the actin highway, then, in the neurons, you've got these long strands that are like highways, and they start in the near the nucleus of the cell body, and they'll go all the way out the axon, out to the end. And they're these long highways, and these little motor molecules, these kinesins, have little legs, and they walk, and they carry their transport load out to wherever it's supposed to go. And there are about 50 of them. They're called KIFs, and they've been numbered. The kinesin family, KIFs, KIF5C, KIF3A. They did some knockout experiments. They discovered that if they knocked out these KIFs, the neurons lost their ability to branch out dendrites and create spines, and they lost their ability to touch other neurons. When they get added and did gain of function experiments, the KIF5C, it enabled the neurons to send more dendrites out and to make more spines and to make more connections. And so we think a lot about neurotransmitters as being the key. It's like, oh, these messengers, the messengers are the ones that are sending the message. Well, you also have to have the highway that allows and the trucks, you have to have the transport medium that's taking everything out there to build the infrastructure to make it work. And if you don't have that, it'll never happen. And so the researchers, through these gain of function and loss of function experiments, discovered that there was a large number of these molecular kinesin machines that are involved in carrying some 650 different RNA molecules from the cell body out to the ends of the dendrites to maintain the neurons and the dendrites and the messaging that goes on. The RNAs are involved in sending, they're the instructions that are being sent out, changing what happens along the dendrite, at the ends of the dendrites. So they are really interested in the potential for, and they did mouse experiments, not just neuron in a dish experiments with these knock in and knock out. And they discovered that not only did it block the loss of function, did it not only knock out the dendrite growth ability, it also made the mice unable to form new long-term memories. So it affected their ability to form new memories. Lost the dendrite building, lost the memories. Added the dendrite building, their memory got better. So could this understanding affect treatment for Alzheimer's disease, for diseases of aging in general, depression? Are there new targets to treat the mental aspects of depression? So it's like starting to dig into the infrastructure of the brain and the cells that hold the brain together, right? Neat. Anyway, this is very inside information as to how the brain works, but it's like these are all the building blocks. It's like, and if you don't have them,
so what can I eat to get more of them?
Yeah, I don't know. This is How do we figure this out?
You can do? Is it running? Do I have to run to get more? Like, I want to know how to maintain this system to keep a plastic brain.
Right. And I think this is something that we don't understand enough about. Like, this is not an area that, like, people, we know about these kinesins, we know they're there, but now we're like, oh, they have this big job and they are essential.
I definitely thought we had more of the brain figured out than we do. It's kind of the most important thing in our body, and we're like, I don't know, Howard.
And it's why it's so difficult to study. Also because not only is it complicated, but it's not a thing that you can like
pull out and put back in.
Yeah. It's not something somebody's gonna lose and be like, guess I don't need that anymore. Mm-hmm. You need all of your brain if you can have it.
Yeah, and so there's a study in Neuron from like about a week ago out of Yale University School of Medicine. They gave psilocybin to mice to see how psilocybin affected their measures of depression. These mice had been trained on a behavioral task that is has been shown to leave the mice depressed. You know,
Oh no.
it's a foot shock experiment where the mice are shocked and they can't get away from the shock. And so the mice eventually just kind of go, okay, that's it. I'm getting shocked.
Get
And
sad. Oh no.
yeah. And so, but psilocybin helped the mice get out of, like, try and not accept their foot shock fate. And they, in addition to that behavioral part, they also saw a 10% increase in neuronal connections. And those connections were about 10% larger. So they're stronger as well, according to the senior author, Alex Kwan. And this didn't just last for 24 hours after this administration of psilocybin. The effects on the brain lasted up to 30 days. They saw changes in the connectivity of the brain. And so I'm looking at this psilocybin experiment in conjunction potentially with other antidepressant experiments, ketamine experiments, you know, all the things that we're looking at as potential tools to treat depression. I'm wondering if we should be looking further back and if these studies should also be looking at the infrastructure. Mm-hmm. What are the kinesins doing? How is psilocybin affecting the kinesin activity in the brain?
That's so interesting. That's like so many antidepressants focus on hormones, which are on a much larger scale than looking at the building blocks of how brains function. And so it's, in the end, it potentially is treating a symptom and not the problem, right? So they're trying to treat the symptom of depression with the problem of hormones blockers, but then really the hormones are the problem. And the cause is actually potentially at a lower level. Right.
And thank you for that comment, because this takes me to an entirely different study. We've been talking a lot about microbes affecting the brain. And the study out in Nature this week discovered that there is an Enterococcus bacterium in our guts. Well, maybe not our guts. This is, of course, another mouse study, but they determined that that bacteria, specific species of bacteria, regulate mouse ability to socialize. So mice can get stressed out when they're hanging out with other mice and meeting other mice. And if they found in this study, if they had no bacteria, had all their bacteria wiped from their body, their brains produced way more cortisol than normal. And so they were much more stressed out about social interactions than they would normally be. And they did a bunch of different strategies to work through the experimental design to nail it all down. But what they ended up saying is that via microbiome profiling and in vivo selection, we identify a bacterial species, Enterococcus faecalis, that promotes social activity and reduces corticosterone levels in mice following social stress. These studies suggest that specific gut bacteria can restrain the activation of the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis and show that the microbiome can affect social behaviors through discrete neuronal circuits that mediate stress responses in the brain. Microbiome affecting hormones, stress hormones in the brain. So we've got hormones, we've got infrastructure, we've got microbes. This is all connected, man.
Boy, that got me sick.
We're a system. We're a biome.
Yes. We are a biome.
We're a Rube Goldberg machine. We're all of it.
We know nothing, Jon Snow.
Yeah. No, the human as biome is a pretty fascinating concept. It really is. There's so many things living in us, and we've gone for so long without even understanding that they were there, and the implications of their interactions or the things that we fed ourselves or exposed ourselves to, what chemicals.
I think we've come to the end of another wonderful episode. Have we?
Yeah.
Have we done it?
Yes.
I think so.
Yeah. Have we scienced our brains out? I feel like my kiffs are just walking down the dendrites. They're making making long-term memories right here, making some brain plasticity changes thanks to these conversations. Everyone, thank you for listening to the show. Thank you for being a part of This Week in Science this week and hopefully every week. Shout outs to Fada for helping with social media and show notes. Gord, thank you for manning the chat room. Identity4, thank you for your work recording the show. And Rachel, thank you for your assistance now editing the show. It's amazing. And I would also love to thank our Patreon sponsors for all of their support. Thank you too. Pierre Velazarb, Ralph E. Figueroa, John Ratnaswamy, Kira, Carl Kornfeld, Jen Myronik, Melanie Stegman, DeKrams, Takari Tazi, Woody MS, Andre Bissett, Chris Wozniak, Dave Bunn, Vegard Shefstad, Hal Snyder, Donathan Stiles, a.k.a. John Stylo, John Lee, Ali Coffin, Maddie Perrin, Gaurav Sharma, Shubru, Don Mundus, Stephen Albaran, Daryl Myshak, Stu Pollock, Andrew Swanson, Fredus104, Sky Luke, Paul Ronovich, Kevin Reardon, Noodles, Jack, Brian Carrington, Matt Bass, Joshua Fury, Shauna, Nina Lamb, John McKee, Greg Riley, Mark Hassenflo, Jean Tellier, Steve Leisman, a.k.a. Zima, Ken Hayes, Howard Tan, Christopher Rappin, Dana Pearson, Richard, Brendan Minish, Jenny Gridley, Kevin Railsback, Flying Out, Christopher Dreyer, Artyom, Greg Briggs, John Atwood. This profile name is hilarious in the name of some other podcast. Rudy Garcia, Dave Wilkinson, Rodney Lewis, Paul Mallory, Sutter, Philip Shane, Kurt Larson, Mountain Sloth, Jim Drapeau, Sarah Chavez, Sue Doster, Jason Olds, Dave Neighbor, Eric Knapp, E.O., Kevin Parachan, Aaron Luthen, Steve DeBell, Bob Calder, Marjorie, Paul Disney, Patrick Pecoraro, Tony Steele, Ulysses Adkins, Brian Condren, and Jason Roberts. Thank you for all of your support on Patreon. And if you are interested in supporting us on Patreon, head over to This Week in Science, TWIS.org's website, and click on that Patreon link on next week's show.
We will be back broadcasting from all of the places that we've been broadcasting. Where are we broadcasting from? We've got the YouTube thing. We've got you can go to the Facebook. We'll be back Wednesday at 8 p.m. Pacific time.
Hey, do you want to listen to us as a podcast? Maybe while you tend to your robots that tend to your crops? Just search for This Week in Science where podcasts are found. If you enjoyed the show, you can get your friends to subscribe as well.
For more information on anything you've heard here today, show notes as well as links to stories will be available on our website, www.twis.org, and you can also sign up for our newsletter.
You can also contact us directly. Email Kirsten at thisweekinscience.com, Justin at twistminion@gmail.com, or me, Blair, at blairbaz@twist.org. Just do me a favor and put TWIS, TWIS, in that subject line, or your email will be spam filtered into a panda's mouth, spun around a black hole, and stuck under dirt that happens to be under other fossilized dirt.
Oh.
And you can also hit us up on the Twitter where we are at TWIS Science, at Dr. Kiki, at Jackson Fly, and at Blair's Menagerie. We love your feedback. If there's a topic you'd like us to cover or address, a suggestion for an interview, a haiku that comes to you in the night, please let us know.
We'll be back here next week, and we hope you'll join us again for more great science news.
And if you've learned anything from the show, remember,
it's all in your head.
This Week in Science. This Week in Science. This Week in Science. This Week in Science, it's the end of the world. So I'm setting up shop, got my banner unfurled. It says the scientist is in, I'm gonna sell my advice. Show them how to stop the robots with a simple device. I'll reverse global warming with a wave of my hand. And all it'll cost you is a couple of grand. 'Cause this week's science is coming your way. So everybody listen to what I say. I use the scientific method for all that it's worth. And I'll broadcast my opinion all over the earth. 'Cause it's This Week in Science. This Week in Science.
This week in science, science, science. This week in science, this week in science. This week in science, 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 science. I've got one disclaimer and it shouldn't be news, that what I say may not represent your views, but I've done the calculations and I've got a plan. If you listen to the science, you may just yet understand that we're not trying to threaten your philosophy. We're just trying to save the world from jeopardy. Jeopardy, jeopardy. And this week in science is coming your way. So everybody listen to everything we say. And if you use our method instead of rolling a die, we may rid the world of toxoplasma gondii. Cause it's this week in science. This week in science. This week in science. 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 This week in science. This week in science. This week in science. 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 Got a laundry list of items I want to address, from stopping global hunger to dredging Loch Ness. I'm trying to promote more rational thought, and I'll try to answer any question you've got. So how can I ever see the changes I seek when I can only set up shop 1 hour a week? This week in science is coming your way. You better just listen to what we say, and if you've learned anything from the words that we've said, then please just remember it's all in your head. Cause it's this week in science. This week in science. This week in science. 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 This week in science. This week in science. This week in science. 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 This week in 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 science. This week